Hi, everyone. This is Mary Pagano with Hera TV and Hera Media Group. I'm very delighted to interview this gentleman from the West Coast. His name is Dail Croome, and Dale has a very interesting background. So he's been in the oil and gas industry for many years, and now he's doing a lot of work in the sustainable community design and development, decentralized food production solutions, and he's also in a band with his sons, and they've been touring the U.S. They've done 700 shows. They've been the opening act for Bon Jovi and the Doobie Brothers, and they have their fourth album coming out in March 2022. So I'm delighted to have this conversation with him. So Dale, welcome to the call. Welcome to the meeting.
Excellent to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So I've got a few questions that I want to ask you. Let me start with this first one here. How and why does an oil executive make the transition from oil and gas to food production? That's a big jump.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, and sometimes you have to listen to the universe too, right, Mary? I was doing very well in that corporate side, and president and vice president of several companies, but my health wasn't perfect. White collar health issues, and one day I actually drove myself to the hospital. I was thinking I was having a heart attack, and I was in my early 40s, and I was still playing hockey 7-8 times a week. I'm a Canadian boy, by the way. And it just sort of made me look at everything quite a bit different. What am I consuming? Obviously exercise is not quite enough. And it started just looking into food. And while all that was going, there was also some natural disasters, let's call them. I was starting to go through a divorce. We had 100-year flood. I had a beautiful house on the river in Calgary, and we had 100-year flood, which was mostly destroyed the house. And there was a downturn in the oil business. So the universe just continued to make it more and more clear until I started to listen.
It does that. It does that.
It really does. So right at the same time, the boys had just finished high school. My two sons, Patrick and Liam, and I'd had them on stage since they were 3 or 4 years old. And right after college, I went to Nashville and tried to make it in the music business for a few months, and came home with my tail between my legs, so to speak, because everybody in Nashville is amazing, and if you don't have anything to stand out, then you're not going to stand out. And a funny story, I met a guy named Lucky Long who had been there for about 25 years and was still talking about the dream, and still playing in the same place I was playing, and I just saw my future right in front of me. Like, I don't want to be doing this for 25 years. I have other options. So anyway, with all that said, the boys said, well, let's do the music thing. And I said, well, if we're going to do this music thing, we're not going to chase fame and fortune. We're not going to do this the same. This needs to be meaningful, because we don't necessarily need to do it for money. What does the world need from art and from music and from a young group of people with a lot of energy? And we started to just give really beautiful intention and meaning to everything. And so it started with the name Daring Greatly Band, which is the 1910 speech, The Man in the Arena. And then we went from there. We came down to LA and lasted 2 days in LA, and just despised the energy of the big city. It wasn't where everyone was maybe human. And so we came south to Oceanside, California, and that area. And we've been here for the last almost 7 years now. And and in the music business, you have a lot of free time, and there's some interesting transitions that humans go through in stillness,
Yeah.
and I had a lot. Um, and so it made me start to read about sustainable communities, and mainly about food and food becoming socioeconomic, and uh, poorer people have to eat poisonous food, and wealthier people get to buy organic food, and looking into all of those because I was still thinking about my own health. And so that was sort of the transition, lots of stillness, and that led to, well, what do I get to do about that? Because we realize now that that a life of service for collective growth, that feeds the soul more than anything else.
Boy, right on. And you know what's the blessing that's in COVID is that I think it's a lot of people have had some major shifts in their life during COVID because they were in the stillness. And sometimes when you slow down is when you get clearer on what your purpose is. So bravo for you on that. There has been talk about sustainable communities for a long time. Why haven't we seen any significant traction?
Um, I think when we live in a world where we have to compete for capital, and this is just my perspective, but when you come from that sort of sophisticated corporate environment, everything is just about, it comes down to and prioritized by what is the most competitive for capital, and the meaning, collective growth. It all sounds wonderful, but if it can't compete for capital in the same way that a new technology can, or something that even creates waste or harms the earth, return on capital still wins in this world. And I think that there's been some amazing groups and some amazing plans and developments on sustainable communities, but I don't know if there's been these great plans on how to do that sustainable community development design and build a financial plan, a sophisticated plan around a competitive return on capital model. And because of that, there's really been no traction in the financial world and the corporate world for many corporate leaders, because everybody has to justify where they put their money. And it seems like you either put it into a competitive financial environment, or you put it into a charity, and there's really no gray area between those two poles, I guess. And what's fun about working with you had your guest on Mark Hewitt, is that for the first time I've seen these wondrous ideal plans on how humans can go forward in a micro city design, and it's a very sophisticated competitive financial model that gets to compete for capital. I think that's the thing that's really been missing from all of this.
Well, I would agree. I think that so many times our ROI looks more at the short term and not so much as the long term and the impact that it makes to all other projects. So we have a tendency to maybe look at it as one specific project and not the long term and the financial impact on the back end. So you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you on that. Another question: why and how does art and music fit into a sophisticated micro city design?
That's a fun one, because we just talked about return on capital, return on investment, and then that question and this topic is maybe a little off of that path. But when we talk about human happiness in general and human growth, um, uh, there's no way we can have that conversation from a psychological perspective, from a nervous system perspective, from a connection to nature and earth, connection to each other, and innovation. And again, Mark talks about this new value system that he's created, maybe the first time it's ever been created without scarcity in the equation. Innovation is a huge part of that equation. And when you think about what's behind innovation, that absolutely is art and absolutely is celebration, because our imagination, our creativity, our skills to be able to dream what's next, that comes from another place. That doesn't come from left brain calculations that we get to make in the everyday world. It comes from allowing ourselves that other dimension. And so when we look at human growth in general, art absolutely is a necessity for us to be able to nurture our imagination and creativity. And art is just short form for artificial representation. And so it's absolutely necessary to give ourselves the space to wander around and play carelessly in that space so that we can see what's next for us. And art really, really does that.
Well, it does. It gets your creative juices. I mean, I can tell when I need to start creating something, and I just feel lighter and better and everything about it. So, but it's
Yeah.
interesting how art, when you can go back and listen to bands and music and words, and like in the 70s, and it's a picture of a time. It's the politics are there, the way we lived. I mean, it's like watching old movies too. It's interesting to see
Yeah.
how we've transformed as a society over the years.
Well, I think if you even like the debate on social media between people, they're only using a hammer when they're talking about their opinions.
Yeah.
And so if someone says, get vaccinated, and someone doesn't want to get vaccinated, they're hitting each other with hammers about, the pros and cons of all of that. And there is this other beautiful, softer side of art that can, with grace and with softness and with metaphor and stories and mythology almost, uh, talk about those things that are absolutely important, but in a softer, more exploratory or way, so that we're not just going around hitting each other with hammers. There's a lot more grace to the artful way in which we can have these conversations, I think.
Yes, exactly. I'm amazed at how we've become so rough on each other. I mean, I it's like, whatever happened to kindness? It kind of like slipped out the window. But I guess when you're going through a pandemic and people are sick or not feeling well or isolated, they're all a bit angry. So I think they all need to listen to some music and chill, right?
Well, that's absolutely, and art again is multidimensional, and we live in such a binary world these days, right? It's either left or right, or vax or unvax, or everything is in a binary term, man, woman. And of course that's nothing to do with real life. And again, art is that exploration. It's not just decoration, it's exploration into the finer points and the multi dimensions and the colors. And so we're not just reducing life to this binary form.
Yeah.
It's funny, in the music business, there's some language sometimes, get out there and support live music. Like it's something that's on life support, and you need to do your duty to go out and support live music to keep it alive. And it's like, no, 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 no. Let's turn that around. You need to go listen to live music because you need to feel alive. You need to let it go through your entire body and see the world beyond the binary form in which it's presented all the time. We don't need to go just put it on life support. You need to go and feel it and let it go into every single decision and every single conversation in every single relationship, and add that beautiful color that art brings. It's not on life support. We're on life support.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay. I have another question for you. Why does this microcity plan have and far greater probability to succeed on a grand scale over other concepts?
Yeah, there's a few reasons, a couple of them that we've already talked about, which is just the absolute attention to return on capital, return on investment. It's a beautiful financial plan, and it is sustainable because Mark and that team has created this financial structure that has no scarcity in it. So we can just talk about growth in that financial side. But other than that, and I'm not sure if Mark touched on this at all, and this absolutely is the feminine side that's so beautifully brought forth with these leaders, is the study of the archetype, the nervous system and the character and the personalities of archetypes within a corporate structure. And so much so that that is on the executive team, and they call it a chief integrity officer. And David and Lori would be amazing guests to be on your show as well. They have a podcast called The One Thing, which is connection to everything. But that's at the heart of every conversation, and every person that's invited to be on this team. There needs to be a minimum level of consciousness around how these micro things that we're doing fit into a macro energy. And again, we're not living in an or world. It always has to be there. And considering all stakeholders, in which Mother Earth is always a stakeholder, in this new plan, this stakeholder economics plan, all of the things have to be cooperated with. But going back to I think it's sustainable because we need to understand the human. At its very depths, we need to understand what makes us happy, what makes us grow, what makes us feel valuable, what makes us want to do our best, what makes us feel alive. Those are big conversations and big ramifications when we're put into a sterile world. And so the micro city, it can't just touch on food production and solve that one problem. It does, but it's got to go way deeper than that. It can't just have sustainable materials to build houses and other commercial structures. It needs to go deeper than that. We can't just solve the healthcare system within a micro city. We have to go deeper into, where are these health issues coming from? And that's been a beautiful conversation. I've been part of a panel with that. And when you talk about cardiovascular disease or cancer, there's one thing that we can talk about where what are the symptoms, and what do we get to treat these symptoms with? But then there's a whole other side that we get to dream, which is part of the art of doing business and living, is how do we eradicate these things? Like totally eradicate cardiovascular disease, totally eradicate cancer, because those are man-made diseases. They do not need to exist. We've come to accept them as every part or a part of everyday life, but I don't think they need to exist. And so what comes from what needs to be created to eradicate those things? And when you dive down that hole, that is a big, big hole, because it comes from early childhood trauma. It comes from not getting the nurturing. It comes from old-fashioned principles that Dr. Spock wrote books about, like let your baby cry. Those early childhood traumas turn into cardiovascular disease. they turn into cancer. And there's been many, many studies, and ACEs study, and the first 1,000 days, these are all beautiful women that have brought this completely new perspective beyond whatever Dr. Spock was writing back in the 50s. And those things, when we look deep at those things, as well as the food and the environment and community and connection, and we learn that humans are the only animal on the planet that would choose touch over food. Like, when we actually think about deeply about the consequences of having that in our nervous system, and how important community is, and how we've developed these old neighborhoods where everybody's isolated, those are at the heart of a lot of the physical manifestations that are happening. So the reason why micro cities probably has the greatest chance that I can see of sustaining is because they're going deep into the core reasons for things happening, and not only building the left brain machinery that has to happen, but also the right brain and feeling and emotional part of how do humans really thrive. And then when we put those two together, it's really insanely exciting.
That is such a huge and deep subject. I can almost go back to and think how, at least in America, every manufacturer has like tripled the sugar in their food, which gives people dopamine or whatever, but yet it also causes cancer. And over the years, we've become more addicted to sugar. We've gained weight. We're becoming a little more miserable, even though sugar gives us a little bit of a high. It's not long lasting, and it causes so many other issues as we progress. And when you look at all these things, that how did we go from having home cooked meals at home when I was a kid, right, to now we go to fast food and we do restaurant, like that's a normal thing, right? And it's interesting how we've evolved, not necessarily for the better, and but we don't deeply think about it. It just kind of creeps into our lives.
Yeah, it's been happening inch by inch, hasn't it? And so much so that we've normalized it all. We've normalized and politicized obesity and other physical manifestations of where we are in our state. And yeah, and there's so many temptations out there in many forms, and but at the heart, we absolutely know through depth psychology and those kind of topics and studies that at the heart of it, it's mostly these human needs, and when they get met, we don't turn to those other things. That there's this greater amount of self-love, and there's this greater amount of self-respect, and those things lead to better decisions, and better behaviors and better habits. And when each individual is bringing that to a collective with a common purpose,
Right.
We've never seen that in our lifetime, ever. Not even close. We've never seen that.
Yeah, that's quite true. When you think about it, if you respect yourself, you respect your friends, you respect your family, you respect your community, a whole lot of things change, don't they?
They really do. And then, when you find your tribe and everybody comes from that sort of minimum space, growth is never a static growth. It's never a straight line. Growth and acceleration is hyperbolic. And so, sorry, that's my math mind, but we can graph growth, and you can see how quickly it gets to infinite. And I think that's when we get to, making pyramids with sound frequency, and that's a whole other topic, of course, but that's when we're capable of spectacular things that right now most people can't even imagine or dream of.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. Question here for you. What kind of deep impacts would creating decentralized food production solutions on all parts of society?
Yeah, and I think we were just touching on that. Imagine if people weren't poisoned by their food, um, and it was just not acceptable to have any kind of poisons in our food, and we were growing our own food and decentralized, and we're just talking about health. And all the beautiful things that can happen through increased health. But then when we talk about, and this is a bigger and maybe even sensitive topic for some, because there's such a dependence, a global dependence on governments. But when you think about the power structures, and not necessarily serving us or our best interests, when we start to take our own power back, through having our own water supply and our own food supply, we start to, get off the dependence of an external power structure like the government, or like the medical or the pharmaceutical industry, or the food manufacturers, and we start to bring our power back. When again we could spend hours dreaming about the beautiful consequences of taking our own power back, and it really starts with food. And so when I was dreaming in my artist dream, in my stillness, about how do we take our power back, how do we make the greatest impact in sort of a priority order or hierarchical order, food was absolutely right at the very top. Well, what if I just started growing my own food? What do I need the government for? What if I have this plot of land? And, I'm talking ideally for now, in the
Right.
idealistic world, what do you need the government for if you have your own source of water and have your own source of food? And of course that leads to other beautiful conversations, but it started in my mind anyway with food. And so when you think about the consequences of decentralized power structures, which is the bigger macro topic, and start to have power structures in these kind of micro cities, everything can be done more efficiently, without corruption, and in a lot more cooperative way, because we still need each other. One micro city doesn't really do much except for the people who live in the micro city. But you think about 100 micro cities and 1,000 micro cities, and you think about then the cooperative networking structures within those cities working together, not coming together to make a centralized power structure, always being aware that centralized power corrupts, that we keep it decentralized and we learn from each other and we build these cooperative networks. Hey, do you want to build a road? Hey, do you want to have economies of scale in transportation? And so you share resources. That can be done a lot more efficiently than any kind of big power structure such as the government. So, it takes me far beyond today's world and today's reality that most people think is the only reality, into what we call parallel structures, like a parallel world in which we can create in our own imagination. And now we can actually use AI to then go down that road and say, where are the pitfalls of this? And go through all of those scenarios and then say, let's build it. And so now we're at the point where we actually get to build it. We've imagined it, we've dreamed it, we put it through the AI. We know now what can go wrong. And now we get to build these parallel structures in which everything is decentralized, which doesn't mean by itself. It just means decentralized and ready to cooperate with other decentralized power structures. And then corruption can't eat its way in.
Interesting. But I mean, In essence, isn't the government like the pooling of funds with taxes to do some of these infrastructure type projects that are needed? Like when you think of the micro cities?
Uh, well, the government, and Mark might give you a different answer to this, but anything that the government can do, private enterprise can do better, is my general statement. And so, again, there's a reality in which we think that we need to build all of our future realities from that foundation. And that foundation is we need to pay taxes and we need a government to do all that. I don't necessarily subscribe to that reality at all, because I always think that private enterprise and private communities can always do it more efficiently, and anything that the government is doing, we can do better without the government, is what I believe. But I know there's a lot of people dependent on the government, which is one of the sources of the problems that we are in right now, I would say. And yeah, I don't really see a need for much government at all, when we're talking about a decentralized world.
Yeah, very interesting. So, Hera is building a city, Hera City, and it's going to be for a smart green city for the future of humanity, for all genders, all religions, all nationalities. And there'll be a strong theme in honor of the women around the world. I mean, we feel very strongly that there's not one city on the planet that represents women. And I think the value of women is extremely important. I mean, there's some places in the world where you can still beat your wife, which should not be a law, right? I mean, it's horrible. So we feel very strongly about the importance of men and women sitting at the table collectively and making the world better. So as we build here a city, from your perspective, what are like the maybe top one or two things that need to be in that city that have to be there from your perspective?
Yeah, and congratulations on that vision, because it takes a lot of courage to even have those visions, doesn't it? Because there's a lot of realists out there that will tell you why it's never going to work, or and also let me say that you know in any depth psychology, we talk about the absolute necessary balance between masculine and feminine, and so and we can see that the world is completely out of balance. And so micro cities and our entire corporate team and everything, we've recognized the patriarchal world is crumbling, and we are part of this beautiful new world that we're creating, where absolutely women and the feminine are crucial to bringing this balance back. And I have powerful women in my life, and that is probably one of the only reasons why my life continues to get better and better, is because I have this beautiful balance. When you're talking about Harris City,
Yep.
and the sustainability of that, again, understanding the core elements of being human and how we thrive, that's a pretty simple formula, and women already have a way greater propensity to look at those things. The men will go straight to the numbers, and they'll go straight to the black and white and the left brain stuff, and that's why it won't succeed without women and the feminine. But what's at the heart of it is understanding the human and our nervous system and psychology and what we really need to thrive. And we need nurturing, and we need touch, and we need balance, and we need love and connection, and those are all the qualities that absolutely the feminine brings to these things. And we need to stop thinking about them as the fluff or the afterthought, because it's absolutely not. Those are core values that have to go into any city plan, I think.
Oh, brilliantly said. Brilliantly said. I think that's um, you know, women are so great at nurturing children and family and community. And the last I checked, we're on this earth to live, and not everything has to be about money, power, and business. And so I think you put the nail on the, you said it very correctly. It takes both of us, all genders, to really create a really terrific environment so that we can effectively evolve. Although everybody's on a different journey, right? And so it's trying to accommodate all those journeys as well, too. So Mark, I'm sorry, Dale, is there any other last minute things that you would like to share with the community?
Again, we were just talking about cooperation, and when I study, let's say, energy and quantum physics and quantum theory, and everything is energy, then everything can be expressed as energy. And love, for instance, the Mandarin language has 48 different words for the one word that we have in the English language, love. But I think love can just be summed up as cooperative energy. And when we approach all aspects of life in this cooperative mood, this cooperative energy, we absolutely can show up in a sophisticated business environment, in the boardroom with our suit and ties on, whatever that takes. We can still show up in love all the time by just allowing our left brain to realize that love is simply cooperative energy. So we want to cooperate with everybody and everything, and then all of the answers kind of just unfold beautifully in a simple kind of fashion.
Very cool. Very wise words. Thank you very much. Dail Croome, really enjoyed having this conversation with you today. And we'll have to engage your band in our Hera concerts as we progress. So I'll share more with you about that offline. So anyway, I really enjoyed meeting you, having this conversation, and having you part of the Hera family. So thank you for your time today. And I hope, yeah, and good success with your new album coming out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.